They signed the papers to end it. But some magic doesn't let you walk away. It makes you try one last time. They already know how this story ends. The question is what they'll change. We begin now. The quill would not bite the parchment. Hermione pressed harder, and still the nib skated across the surface as if the page had been waxed against her, leaving no mark, only the thin grey ghost of pressure that faded before her eyes could fix on it. She lifted the pen, examined it. Ordinary ministry issue, the kind that signed away houses and custody and the small ruined empires of other people's lives every hour of every day in this very room. With its long table, the colour of weak tea, and its single high window, letting in the dishwater light of a London afternoon in November. Across the table, he had not moved. Draco Malfoy sat with his own copy squared before him, his own quill uncapped and ready, and he was watching her hand the way a man watches a wound he expects to start bleeding again. He had not aged so much as sharpened. The war had taken the boyish softness out of his face and left the architecture behind. The clean jaw, the pale brow, the mouth that had learned, somewhere in the last 3 years, to stay shut. There was a silver ring still on his left hand. She noticed it the way you notice the absence of a tooth with your tongue, compulsively returning to it. She had taken hers off in the corridor outside. It sat now in the small inner pocket of her coat, a cold weight against her ribs. "It's defective," she said. Her voice came out level, which was its own small victory. "The pen. Mine won't take. Try mine." He pushed his across the polished wood. It travelled the distance between them and stopped just short of her fingers, spinning a slow quarter turn before it stilled. She took it. She set the nib to the line that bore her name. Hermione Jean Granger Malfoy, the hyphen a small hinge she had stopped using 2 summers ago. And she wrote the H, and the H held for the length of a heartbeat, and then dissolved back into clean cream parchment as though no hand had ever touched it. The silence in the room changed temperature. She knew that feeling. She had spent enough of her life with old magic to recognize the precise quality of stillness that came before something ancient decided to speak. It was a pressure behind the sternum, a thickening of the air, the static charge an instant before a storm cracks open over the moor. The high window darkened by a single degree. The candles in their iron sconces, lit against the dim afternoon, leaned all at once toward the centre of the table, every flame bowing inward as if a door had opened somewhere and a draught had come hunting for them. Draco was on his feet before she had fully understood why she wanted to be. Granger, not Hermione. He had not called her Hermione in 11 months, and she had told herself she preferred it, this surname kept at arm's length, this courtesy of distance. Step back from the table. What is it doing? Step back. She did not, because she had never in her life done a thing simply because Draco Malfoy commanded it, and so she was still standing there with his quill in her fingers when the parchment beneath her other hand grew warm, then hot, then the words upon it, both their names, the cold legal scaffolding of dissolution, the date, the seals, lifted clean off the page in threads of light, fine as spider silk, gold gone to white, and rose into the air between them and began slowly to braid. She dropped the pen. it made no sound. The threads turned. They found her wrist first. She felt it as a warmth, not a binding, a band of light settling against her pulse with the weight of a remembered hand. And then they crossed the table and found his. And between her wrist and his, the light drew taut, a single luminous filament that connected the two of them across 3 feet of ministry oak and would not let go. "No," she said, to the magic, to the room, to the entire architecture of the day she'd spent 3 weeks bracing herself to survive. No, this was agreed. This was the solicitors, the ministry, everyone signed off. The Malfoy estate has no standing to. "The ministry," Draco said very quietly, and she heard underneath the quiet a thing she had not heard from him in a long while. Not contempt, not boredom, but the flat dread of a man recognizing a thing he had hoped never to meet. Has no authority over the contract. No one does. That's the entire point of it. The light at her wrist pulsed once, gently, like something with a heartbeat, and went out. Not vanishing, but absorbing, sinking into the skin until there was nothing to see at all, only the lingering sense that it was still there, woven now beneath the surface where no quill or solicitor could reach it. The candles straightened. The window paled back to its ordinary grey. The 2 copies of their divorce lay flat and blank upon the table, every word stripped from them, 2 clean sheets of expensive nothing. Hermione stared at her own wrist. She turned it over. There was no mark. "Explain," she said. "Now, in words." He did not sit. He moved to the window instead and stood with his back to her, and she watched the line of his shoulders under the dark coat, the careful, expensive cut of everything he wore, the armor of a family that had survived by always looking as though it had survived. And she watched those shoulders rise and fall once with a breath he was trying to make look ordinary. "The Malfoy marriage contract is older than the ministry," he said to the glass. "Older than the Wizengamot. It predates the law you're trying to use to break it by something like 400 years. My ancestors did not build it to make people happy. They built it to keep the line from fracturing, to stop a Malfoy from marrying in haste, ruining the bloodline, and walking away clean." A pause. The fog of his breath bloomed and shrank on the cold pane. "It does not recognize the word agreed. It recognizes only one thing." "Which is?" He turned. The dishwater light caught the grey of his eyes and made them paler, almost colourless. And for one unguarded instant, before the shutter came down, before the Malfoy stillness reassembled itself over his face, she saw that he was as frightened as she was, and trying just as hard not to be. "Truth," he said. "It recognizes whether a marriage was entered honestly. We entered ours honestly, Granger. God help us both, we did. And so the contract will not let it die dishonestly. It won't accept a signature given in a room like this, between 2 people who can't look at each other, scratching out the worst 3 years of their lives in under 5 minutes so they can each be home by supper." His jaw tightened. The muscle there jumped once and stilled. "It demands a year." The word landed in the center of the table and sat there like a live thing. "A year of what?" she said, though some cold-fingered part of her had already understood was already counting the rooms of the manor she had sworn she would never sleep in again. Was already hearing the particular hush of those corridors at 3 in the morning when she could not sleep and he would not come. Cohabitation. He said it the way you'd name a sentence. One full turn of the calendar, under the same roof, living as... His mouth twisted, not quite a smile, nothing like a smile. As a married couple are understood to live, honestly. The wards can tell the difference between a marriage and a performance. They always could. That was always the trouble with them. He looked at the blank parchment, then at her, and something behind his composure cracked very slightly, a hairline fracture in old glaze. If we serve the year truthfully, the contract releases us at the end of it, and we may dissolve the marriage freely, and it will let us go. If we try to cheat it, separate houses, separate lives, a marriage on paper and strangers underneath, it simply does not run. The year resets. We begin again, and again, for as long as it takes. The room was very cold. She became aware that she had wrapped both arms around herself and made herself lower them, made herself stand the way she stood in a courtroom or a hostile meeting, spine drawn up out of the wreckage of her composure by main force. "You knew," she said. "You knew this would happen when I walked in here." "I suspected." He did not flinch from it. That, at least, was the same as it had always been. Draco Malfoy might lie about 1,000 things, might hide behind 1,000 silences. But when she pinned him directly, he had a terrible habit of telling her the truth to her face. "I read the contract again last week. My father never explained it to me properly. He assumed I'd never need to know, since Malfoys do not divorce. They simply learn to live in the same house and never speak, which apparently the magic finds entirely acceptable. A breath that might, in another life, have been a laugh. I hoped I was wrong. I came today hoping the quill would write. And it didn't. And it didn't." She crossed to the table because she could not bear to keep standing in the open middle of the room. She put her fingertips on the blank parchment, on the warm place where her own name had been and was no longer, and she thought of the flat she had taken in Islington with its good light and its silence she had been so relieved by, the silence of a place where no one's grief lived but her own. She thought of the trunk already half packed. She thought of the way she had let herself believe, for 3 weeks, that the worst part was already behind her, that the signing was the end of the pain, and not, as it now turned out, only the threshold of more. 1 year, she said. 1 year. And at the end of it, we're free, truly, whatever happens between now and then. Something moved across his face, there and gone, too quick to name. "Whatever happens between now and then," he agreed, and his voice was steady, and she did not believe the steadiness for a moment, because she had spent 3 years learning the precise weight of his voice, and she knew when it was carrying something, it would not set down. Outside, the November light was already failing. The window had gone the colour of a bruise, and the candles had begun, without anyone touching them, to burn a little brighter against the coming dark, as though the room itself had decided the 2 of them would be there a while longer. He picked up his coat from the back of the chair. He did not put it on. He held it and looked at her across the table where their unmade divorce lay in 2 clean sheets, and she understood that he was waiting for her, that whatever this was, wherever it took them, The first step out of this room would have to be taken together, because the thin, warm thread beneath her skin and beneath his would let it be no other way. The manor, then, he said, quietly, as if asking, as if, for the first time in 11 months, he were asking her for anything at all. Hermione picked up her own coat. The ring was still in the pocket. She felt the cold circle of it through the wool against her hand, and she did not take it out, and she did not leave it behind. "The manor," she said, and she walked with him to the door. The manor received them the way a held breath receives the air it has been waiting for. Hermione felt it the instant they crossed the threshold. The great iron-banded door swinging inward before Draco's hand had touched it. The rush of warmth from rooms that should have been cold. The candelabra in the entrance hall flaring to life along the length of the gallery in a long, rolling sequence, one after another, as though the house were lighting her path on purpose. It had never done that for her before. In 3 years of living here, she had learned to navigate the dark, to find the sconces by touch and light them herself, because the manor had tolerated her without ever once welcoming her. Now it threw open every flame at her feet, and she understood with a sinking certainty that the contract had spoken to the wards, and the wards had decided she belonged. She hated how much her body wanted to believe it. "It's never done that," Draco said, beside her, low. He was looking at the lit gallery with an expression she could not read. "Not for guests. I'm not a guest." The words came out sharper than she'd meant. "Apparently. No." He set his coat on the newel post, not on the hook, she noticed. The same careless habit, 3 years, and the same draped coat over the same carved oak post, and the noticing was its own small ambush. Apparently not. The house was exactly as she had left it 11 months ago, and entirely changed, the way a room is changed by the simple fact of your having sworn never to enter it again. The long Persian runner, the colour of dried blood. The portraits, most of them empty now or pretending to sleep. The Malfoy dead, having learned that they got no entertainment from her. The particular smell of the place, beeswax and cold stone, and, underneath, very faint, the green pharmacy scent of the potions Draco still brewed at night when he could not sleep. A smell she had once found comforting, and had then, for a long stretch of months, found unbearable, because it meant he was awake and elsewhere, and not with her. A house elf appeared at the foot of the stairs with a soft displacement of air. Not Tibby. Tibby had died the winter before last, of nothing but age and the particular Malfoy melancholy that even the elves caught eventually. But a younger one, narrow-eared, twisting a clean cloth between its fingers. "The mistress's rooms is aired," the elf said to the floor, "as master instructed." Hermione went still. Which rooms? The elf's eyes flicked to Draco and back to the carpet. The East Wing, mistress. The blue rooms. The blue rooms. Her old refuge, before they had married. The suite she'd been given when she first came to the manor. In the days when the two of them had still been a rumour, neither would confirm. When she would lie awake in those cool blue rooms and listen for his footstep in the corridor and despise herself for listening. After the wedding, she had moved across the house to share his rooms in the West Wing. The old master's quarters, with their black timber and their view of the dark lake. And then, last spring, after everything had gone to ash between them, she had moved back to the blue rooms alone. And that retreat across the breadth of the house had been the first true death of their marriage, the one that came before all the legal deaths, the one that mattered. He had put her back in the blue rooms. She did not know whether to be grateful or to strike him. "You instructed," she repeated. Draco was looking very fixedly at a point on the far wall. "You preferred them. Last spring. I assumed." "You assumed correctly." She heard the frost in it and did not soften it. "Thank you." The thread beneath her wrist gave the faintest tug. Not pain, not even quite sensation, only a kind of awareness, as though the magic had turned its head at the chill in her voice and was listening. She wondered if it could tell. The wards can tell the difference between a marriage and a performance. Could they tell the difference between a courtesy and a wound dressed up as one? She pressed her thumb hard against her own pulse, and the tug faded. "There are conditions," Draco said. He had moved to the long table beneath the stair, where a single sheet of parchment lay weighted under a paperweight of green glass. He did not pick it up. "The terms of the year. The contract spelled them out this morning, while you were—" A hesitation, the ghost of a different sentence abandoned. "On your way. I had Pince at the ministry copy them down." She came to the table. The script was not the ministry's tidy hand, but something older, the letters tall and thorned, the ink very black and faintly raised, as though it had been pressed into the page by something with weight behind it. She read, "The parties shall reside beneath one roof for the full turning of the year. The parties shall take the evening meal together, that no day pass without speech between them. The parties shall not deceive one another in matters of the heart, for the binding knows untruth, and the binding will not abide it. Neither party shall lie with another while the binding holds. At the year's honest completion, the binding shall release what it has held, and the parties shall be free. Shall not deceive one another in matters of the heart," she read aloud. Her voice did something complicated on the last word. How is that even enforceable? People deceive themselves about their own hearts every hour of the day. I don't know my own heart half the time. How is a 400-year-old door supposed to— I don't know. He said it simply, and the simplicity of it disarmed her more than any argument could have. I've lived under this magic my whole life, and I don't understand it. My grandfather used to say the binding doesn't read what you feel. It reads what you do with what you feel, whether you acted true or acted false. He turned the parchment a quarter turn on the table, an idle, fretting motion, the same restless hands he'd always had. I think it means we can't perform. That's all. We can fight. We did plenty of that, and it never troubled the wards. But we can't pretend, can't smile across the supper table and call it a marriage when it's a corpse. The binding wants the truth of us, whatever the truth is, even if the truth is that we can't stand the sight of each other. And can you? The question was out before she had decided to ask it. Stand the sight of me? He looked up. For a long moment, he did not answer, and in the not answering, the entrance hall seemed to grow very large around them, the lit candles throwing their two shadows enormous and overlapping up the panelled wall. and she watched his face do the thing it did when he was deciding how much of himself to spend. The slight narrowing, the calculation, the old instinct to give nothing that could be used against him. She had married that calculation. She had spent 3 years trying to get behind it, and had finally, exhausted, stopped trying. And the stopping had been the thing that ended them, though neither of them had named it at the time. "That was never the problem, Granger," he said at last, quietly, "not being able to stand the sight of you." And then, before she could find the shape of a reply, before she could even decide whether the warmth that had risen in her throat was longing or fury, because with him the two had always been so close as to share a border. He straightened, and the shutter came down over his face, and he was once more the cool, composed stranger she had signed a divorce to escape. "You'll want to rest," he said. "Supper's at 8. The contract is quite particular about it." A pause. "I'll be in the library until then. You needn't trouble yourself about where I am. The house is large enough." The house is large enough. The words she had said to him last spring, when he had asked, clumsily in the only language he knew, which was the language of furniture and arrangements rather than feeling, whether she wanted him to move his things. The house is large enough. She had meant, "Stay away from me. I cannot survive your nearness right now." He had heard, she'd realized much later, something else entirely, and had retreated into the West Wing and never come back, and each of them had spent the following months believing the other had been the one to leave. He was giving the sentence back to her now. She did not think he knew he was doing it, or perhaps he knew exactly. "Fine," she said. He inclined his head, the smallest fraction, and turned for the corridor that led toward the library, and she watched him go. The dark coat she could still feel the absence of warmth from, the unhurried walk that had always seemed to her like a man moving through a house he didn't much want to own. And she let him get 6 steps before the thing she had been holding behind her teeth since the ministry came loose. "You could have warned me." He stopped. He did not turn. "You read the contract last week," she went on, and now her voice had heat in it, the clean, welcome heat of anger that was so much easier to hold than the other things. "You suspected, you knew, and you let me walk into that room and brace myself to sign and feel. For one entire morning, I let myself believe it was almost over, Draco. I let myself believe I was nearly free of this house and this family and you. And you knew the whole time I wasn't, and you said nothing. You let me find out with a quill in my hand and the candles bending, and that light going into my arm." She stopped. Her hand had come up to her own wrist again without her permission, gripping it. "You could have given me 1 day to prepare. You gave me nothing. You always gave me nothing." The corridor was dim where he stood, half out of the candlelight, and so she saw the change in him more in his outline than his face. The way his shoulders set, the way one hand curled slowly at his side until the knuckles stood pale against the dark of his sleeve, the silver ring catching the light as his fingers closed. "You think I wanted this," he said. He still hadn't turned. His voice had gone very low and very controlled, which she knew, which she had learned the hard way, was the most dangerous register he had. Not the shouting, but the quiet quiet that meant something had been struck near the bone. You think I read that contract and rejoiced, that I sat in that manuscript room at 2 in the morning and thought, good, now I get to keep her another year. Now I get to sit across a table from a woman who looks at me the way you look at me. I don't know what you thought. You never told me. That was the entire... No. He turned then, and the word came out with a force that stopped her. And for one bare instant the composure was simply gone, stripped clean off, and what was underneath was raw enough that she took half a step back. You don't get to do that. You don't get to stand in my house and tell me I gave you nothing when you stopped asking me for anything 11 months before you stopped asking for everything. You moved across the house, Granger. You took the blue rooms. I came to your door. Do you know how many times I came to your door that spring and stood there and listened to you not sleeping and went away again because I didn't have the first idea what to say to a woman who'd built a wall out of her own grief and dared me to climb it? Don't, she said. Don't you dare talk about... And now you stand here and tell me I gave you nothing. Stop. The word cracked across the hall, and on its heels every candle in the long gallery guttered at once, all of them ducking low in their iron cups as though a great hand had passed over the flames, and the thread beneath her wrist flared. Not gently this time, not the curious listening pulse of before, but a true and unmistakable burn, a band of heat tightening around the bone, and she saw Draco's hand fly to his own wrist in the same instant with the same flinch, and the two of them stood frozen 6 feet apart in the dimming light, each gripping the place where the binding had reminded them, with brutal economy, exactly what it would and would not abide. The heat ebbed. The candles climbed back up their wicks one by one, slower than before, sullen. The hall settled. They stared at each other across the ruin of the conversation, breathing, and Hermione understood, with a clarity that frightened her far more than the burn had, that the binding had not punished them for fighting. It had let the fight run for a full minute and more without the slightest objection. It had only flared at the very end, at the precise word, stop. At the moment, one of them had reached for silence as a weapon. The contract did not mind that they were furious. It only minded when they refused to speak. 8 o'clock, Draco said. His voice had gone rough. He was still holding his wrist. Supper. I'll see you there. And he walked away down the dim corridor, and this time she let him go. And she stood alone in the great lit hall of the house she had sworn to leave forever, with her old refuge waiting in the east wing, and a year stretched out ahead of her like a corridor with no end she could see. And she pressed her palm flat over the warm hidden thread in her wrist, and felt beneath it the slow, insistent beat of her own unwilling heart. The dining room at Malfoy Manor had been built to seat 30, and so the two of them sat at the near end of a table long enough to land a broom on, with a single branch of candles between them and the rest of the room receding into shadow, and the distance was its own commentary. Hermione had come down at 5 minutes to 8 because she would not give the contract the satisfaction of a tug, and she had found him already there, standing at the window with a glass of something amber he had not touched. He had changed. A dark shirt, the collar open, the formality of the daytime stripped away, and the small intimacy of seeing him out of his armour caught her somewhere under the ribs before she had braced for it. She took her seat. He took his. The elf brought soup neither of them wanted. "This is absurd," she said to the soup. "Which part?" "All of it. The table, the candles. Two people who can't bear each other observing the forms of a dinner party because a door from the 15th century requires us to make conversation." She picked up her spoon and set it down again. "What are we supposed to talk about, Draco? The weather? The state of your investments? Shall I tell you about my caseload and you nod, and we both watch the clock, and at the end of an hour we've performed enough married behaviour to satisfy the wall?" "The wards would know," he said, "if we performed it. We established that this afternoon." The reminder sat between them. Both their wrists, she suspected, still carried the memory of the burn. She had caught him twice now, pressing his sleeve flat against the table edge, the way you press on a bruise to check it's still tender. "Then what?" she said. "Honestly, what does it want from us?" He turned his glass a slow quarter turn on the cloth. That fretting habit again, his hands always needing some small task to manage. And for a while he didn't answer, and the candle flames stood straight and tall in the windless room, and she watched the light move on the planes of his face. "My grandmother lived under this contract 60 years, he said finally. "Married my grandfather at 19. Hated him by all accounts for the first decade. He was a cold man, colder than my father, which is saying a good deal. She told me once, when I was small, that the binding doesn't ask you to love each other. It can't. Love isn't a thing you can command into being, and the magic isn't a fool. It knows that. What it asks." He stopped, frowning, hunting the words, and the hunting was so unlike his usual fluency that she found herself leaning forward without deciding to. "What it asks is that you don't lie about where you are, with each other. That you tell the truth about the distance, even when the distance is the whole truth there is." She said the year only breaks people who try to fake the closeness. It leaves alone the ones who can say, plainly, "I am far from you, and here is why." Hermione was quiet. "So, that's the game," she said at last. "We tell each other the truth about how far apart we are. It's not a game." "No." She looked down at her hands on the cloth, at the pale strip of skin where the ring had been for 3 years and was not now. "No, I don't suppose it is." The elf cleared the soup, untouched, and brought something else. Outside, a wind had come up off the lake. She could hear it working at the old casements, finding the gaps, and somewhere far off in the house, a shutter knocked once against stone and went still. "All right," she said. "The truth about the distance. I'll go first." She made herself look up, made herself hold his pale gaze across the candles. "When you put me in the blue rooms today, I didn't know whether to thank you or throw the green paperweight at your head, both at once. Because part of me thought he remembered. He remembered I needed that room. After everything, he still knows me well enough to know that. And the other part thought, of course, he put me back where I exiled myself. Of course, he wants me at the far end of the house. He's drawn the same map of the marriage I drew last spring, and he's confirming it." Her throat tightened. She pressed through it. "I couldn't tell which it was. I still can't. And I've spent 11 months not telling you things like that. So, there it is. That's the distance. He had gone very still while she spoke. The candle nearest him guttered and recovered. When he answered, his voice had lost its careful flatness. It was the first thing, he said. The remembering. I gave the order before I'd thought about what it would look like. The elf asked which rooms, and I said the blue ones before I could dress it up as a strategy. He turned the glass again, then stopped himself, flattened his hand against the table instead. And then I spent the rest of the afternoon certain you'd read it as a verdict, as me agreeing that the far end of the house was where you belonged. I nearly sent the elf to move your things to the west wing, and then I thought, she'll read that as me forcing the issue, dragging her back to the rooms where it all went wrong, and I... A short, frustrated breath, almost a laugh at himself. You see the difficulty. Every gesture I can think of means 3 things at once, and I can't tell which one you'll catch, and so the safest thing has always been to make no gesture at all, which you then read as me giving you nothing. The accuracy of it landed like cold water. She set down her fork. Yes, she said softly. That's exactly what I read. I know. He met her eyes. You told me so. In the hall, loudly. And there, unexpected, unwilling, the corner of her mouth pulled. Not a smile. The threat of one. She caught it before it could become anything, but he had seen it, and something behind his composure eased a fraction, the way a fist eases when the threat passes, and for one suspended moment the long dark room with its absurd table did not feel like a sentence being served. The thread at her wrist gave a small, warm pulse. She glanced down at it. So did he. It approves, he said dryly. It can mind its own business. It very much cannot. That's rather the defining feature of it. This time the almost laugh was hers, and it surprised her so badly that she covered it with reaching for her water, and the small, frantic motion, the unnecessary reach, the careful study of the glass as though its contents required her full attention, gave her away more completely than laughter would have. When she set the glass down, he was watching her with an expression she had not seen on his face in over a year. Not the shudder, not the calculation, but a kind of careful, dawning attention, as though she had moved unexpectedly in his peripheral vision, and he had turned his whole self to look. She did not know what to do with being looked at like that. She had forgotten. The forgetting was its own grief. Your turn, she said, to break it. The distance. You go. The attention banked but did not go out. He was quiet a moment, and then he said, I stopped brewing the sleeping draughts in the west wing last spring. After you moved, started doing it in the old still room off the kitchens instead. He said it carefully, watching her, and she did not understand at first why this counted as truth about distance, why he had reached for this of all things. You used to say the smell came through the walls, the valerian, and you said it kept you awake, knowing I was awake. So, I moved the brewing to the far side of the house where it couldn't reach you. I thought I was... His jaw worked. I thought I was being considerate, giving you the silence you'd asked for. It took me 4 months to understand that I'd taken away the one thing that still told you I was in the house at all. That you'd stopped being kept awake by the smell and started lying awake because there was nothing. because the manor had gone completely quiet, and a quiet house is so much worse than a haunted one. Hermione's chest had gone tight. She had never told him that. She had never told anyone that. The terror of those silent months, the way she had lain in the blue rooms straining for any sound of him and hearing only stone and wind. The way the absence of the Valyrian smell had felt like proof. He had finally stopped being awake on her account, finally stopped caring enough to lose sleep. "How did you know," she managed, that the quiet was worse?" "I didn't." He looked down at his untouched plate. "I'm guessing. Right now. I'm guessing that the silence hurt you the way it hurt me, because the alternative is that it hurt only me, and I've spent 11 months unable to decide which would be worse." He raised his eyes. "Tell me I'm wrong. The contract will know if you do. So tell me the truth. Was the quiet worse?" The candle flames stood very straight. The wind worked at the casement. The thread at her wrist lay warm and listening beneath her skin, and she understood that this was the thing. This exact moment, this small unbearable question across a too long table. This was what the magic had been built to force 4 centuries ago, out of people exactly as proud and frightened and ruined as the two of them. "Yes," she said. Her voice broke on it just slightly, the first crack in 3 weeks of perfect control. "The quiet was worse. The quiet was so much worse, Draco. I used to leave my door open. Did you know that? I left it open every night for a month, in case... I don't even know in case of what. In case you came. In case the smell came back. In case the house remembered it had 2 people in it." She pressed her lips together hard. "And it never did. And I felt like a fool for leaving the door open, so I started closing it. And once I'd closed it, I couldn't make myself open it again, because opening it would have meant admitting I still wanted..." She stopped. The sentence had walked her to the edge of something she had not meant to say aloud, had not said aloud even to herself in the long grey months. And she felt the heat climb her throat, and she reached helplessly for the water glass again, fingers closing on nothing because she had already moved it, fumbling, knocking it so that it rocked, and a thin tongue of water spilled across the white cloth toward the candle. He caught the glass before it fell. His hand closed over hers on the stem, not gripping, only steadying, his palm cool and dry over the back of her fingers. And the contact ran up her arm like the static charge before a storm breaks, the whole length of her skin lifting toward it, and neither of them moved, his hand over hers in the candlelight with the spilled water spreading dark between them, and across the small distance that was suddenly no distance at all, she heard him stop breathing. The thread at her wrist did not pulse. It went utterly, perfectly still, the stillness of a thing holding its breath alongside them. And Hermione looked up from their 2 hands into his face, close now, closer than it had been in 11 months, and found him already looking at her with the shutter gone, and nothing behind it but the question he had asked, and she had not finished answering. She drew her hand back first. It was the coward's move, and she knew it even as she made it, sliding her fingers from beneath his, taking up the spilled water with her napkin, as though the small domestic emergency were the only thing in the room that required her. And he let her go, and the cool of where his palm had been turned cold at once, and the candle flames breathed out and steadied, and the moment that had hung between them like a struck bell was allowed to fade unanswered. "It's late," she said to the wet cloth. "It isn't, particularly. It's late for me." He did not argue. He rose when she rose, the old reflexive courtesy he had never once dropped in 3 years, and she felt his eyes on her the whole length of the long room as she walked away from the candles into the dark. And she did not look back, because if she looked back, she did not trust what her face would do. She did not sleep. She lay in the blue rooms with the door. She noticed this only at 2 in the morning, having sworn she would not, propped a hand's width open, and she listened to the manor breathe. And somewhere past midnight, she became aware of the faint green pharmacy smell of valerian threading up through the house. And she understood that he had gone back to the old West Wing still room to brew where the scent would reach her. And she lay very still in the dark and let it reach her, and did not know whether what moved in her chest was comfort or its opposite, and was too tired finally to keep them apart. The storm came 3 nights later. It had been building all that strange suspended week, the week in which they had taken every supper at the long table and told each other small, careful truths about the distance. And the distance had not closed, exactly, but had begun to feel less like a wall and more like a width of water, something that could in principle be crossed. They had not touched again. She had made sure of it. She arranged the table now so that the candles sat between them and the salt and the water, and a low bowl of late roses the elf insisted on cutting, a small fortification of objects. And Draco had noticed the fortification and said nothing about it, which was its own kind of saying. But the storm did not care for fortifications. It came off the lake near midnight, a true autumn gale, the kind that the manors wards were meant to hold at bay. And that was the trouble, she would understand later. The wards. The same ancient magic that bound the two of them ran through the stones of the house, and it had been thrown out of true by the binding, stretched thin across the new demand of holding them. And so, when the gale struck the east wing, the wards that should have steadied the old glass simply were not there. She woke to the sound of the blue rooms coming apart. The casement burst inward with a crack like a curse going off. Glass and wind and cold rain all at once. The candles guttering dead, the curtains snapping like sails. And then the deeper sound underneath, the groan of stone as the storm found the failing ward and tore through it. And the whole east corner of the wing shuddered on its foundations. She was on her feet with her wand in her hand before she was properly awake, throwing a shield at the broken window that the wind ripped away like wet paper. And above her, the ceiling gave a long, sick crack, and a fault opened across the old plaster and began to widen. "Granger!" He was in the doorway. She didn't know how he had crossed the dark house so fast. His shirt soaked through where the rain had reached him in the corridor, his wand up, and his face white in the lightning that strobed through the ruined window. "Get to me. The floor's going." It was. She felt it tilt. The old boards beneath the window, undermined by water and the dying ward, were beginning to drop away into the dark, and the gap between her bed and the door had become a thing that was opening, the room dividing along the line of the fault, and the wind was a wall pushing her back toward the broken edge. "Draco! Reach me!" She lunged through the gap as the floor went. There was a sickening half-second of nothing under her foot, the dark mouth of the broken room beneath, the rain driving sideways into her eyes. And then his hand closed around her wrist, exactly the wrist, the bound one, and the contact was electric, was the static of the storm itself pouring up her arm, and he hauled, all his weight thrown back against the doorframe, and she came over the widening gap and into him so hard that they both went down against the corridor wall in a tangle of soaked limbs and gasping breath, while behind her the blue rooms folded quietly inward and surrendered the rest of the floor to the dark. For a long moment, neither of them moved. She was against his chest. She could feel his heart going like a hammer under the wet shirt, feel the rise and fall of him fighting for breath, feel his arms still locked around her with a strength that had not yet remembered to let go. The corridor was black, save for the lightning. Rain came in sheets through the breach behind them, and she could taste it on her own mouth, cold and mineral, the storm water and the dust of broken plaster, and underneath all of it, very close, the warm scent of his skin that she had spent 11 months teaching herself to forget. "You're hurt," he said. His voice was wrecked. His hand had come up to her face without permission, his thumb finding a thin line of heat along her temple where the glass had caught her. And the touch was so careful, so at odds with the violence of the last minute, that she shut her eyes against it. "You're bleeding. It's nothing. A scratch. Draco. The whole wing could have come down. If I'd been a half-second..." He stopped. His thumb was still against her temple. She felt the tremor in it. Draco Malfoy, who controlled his hands the way other men controlled their tongues, was shaking, and he could not stop it, and he had not yet let her go. "If I'd been asleep, if the smell of the valerian hadn't kept me up. I was in the still room. I felt the ward go. I felt it go in the binding first. Here." His other hand found his own wrist, where the thread lay. "It pulled me. The binding pulled me toward you the instant the danger started. I didn't decide to run. My feet were already moving." She opened her eyes. He was very close. The lightning came again and showed her his face stripped of every defense, soaked and white and frightened, looking at her as though she were the only solid thing in a house that was coming down. And she understood with a lurch that the binding had not made him run. The binding had only freed him to. It had taken the locked thing in him, the gesture he could never make, the door he could never knock on, the 11 months of standing in corridors not daring. And the danger had burned all of it away in an instant. And what was left, what had crossed the dark house faster than thought, was simply the truth of him that the contract had been hunting for all along. "You felt it pull you," she said. "Yes." "Toward me?" "Yes." Almost angry now, the word as though the admission cost him blood. "Toward you. It always..." He broke off, and his jaw worked, and his thumb moved once against her temple, wiping rain or blood she couldn't tell. "It pulls toward you. It has from the start. I just never let it move my feet before." The rain hammered. The ruined wing groaned and settled. Somewhere, the young elf was crying out for them through the storm, and neither of them answered, because the whole world had narrowed to the 18 inches of dark and lightning between his mouth and hers, and his hand was on her face and her own hands. She became aware of this distantly, as of something happening to someone else, had fisted in the wet front of his shirt and were not letting go either. The thread at her wrist was silent, watching. "We should," she started. "I know. The wing, the elf. We have to. I know." But he didn't move, and neither did she, and the storm flung itself against the broken house, and for one suspended heartbeat, his forehead came down against hers. Just that. Just the cool press of his brow to hers in the dark, his breath unsteady against her lips, close enough that the smallest tilt of either of them would have ended 11 months of silence in a single act neither could take back. A great crash from the depths of the east wing as another section of floor let go. It broke them apart. He was up at once, hauling her with him, his wand out, the soldier in him taking over from the man. "Behind me, the corridors sound, but the rooms aren't. Stay behind me." And they went together down the black passage toward the unbroken heart of the house. His hand locked around her wrist again, hers gripping his sleeve, and the storm roared at their backs through the wound it had torn in the manor, and Hermione ran through the dark with her husband's heartbeat still printed against her own, and her mouth still cold with the kiss that had not quite happened. They reached the west wing, the old master's quarters, his rooms, the black timber, the wide bed, the view of the lake she could not see now for the rain lashing the glass. And he pulled her inside and threw a sealing charm at the door behind them. And only then, in the sudden relative quiet, with the storm muffled to a roar beyond the thick old walls, did they stop and stand and look at each other, each, both of them soaked to the skin, both of them shaking, her temple bleeding a thin, warm line down the side of her face, his shirt torn at the shoulder where the broken door frame had caught it, the single lamp he'd lit with a flick of his wand throwing their two shadows up the dark panelling, overlapping, indistinguishable. There was only the one bed. She saw him register it the same instant she did, saw his eyes go to it and then away, saw the careful neutrality come down over his face like a man stepping back from an edge. And he turned at once toward the wardrobe, all brisk competence, pulling out a dry shirt for himself and something for her, a heavy robe, anything. His voice gone formal again with the effort of it. "You'll catch your death. Here, the bathroom's through there. I'll take the chair. The night only. Until the elf can..." "Draco." He stopped, the robe held out between them, his hand not quite steady. "You felt it pull you," she said again, and this time it was not a question, and her voice did not shake, and across the small lamplit room she watched the truth of what she was about to say arrive in his face before she had finished saying it. "Toward me, from the start, and you never let it move your feet." She took the robe from his hand. Her fingers brushed his, and neither of them pulled away. "What if you stopped not letting it?" The lamp guttered. The storm pressed at the glass, and Draco Malfoy stood in the wreck of the night with his torn shirt and his shaking hands, and looked at her as though she had asked him to step off the edge of the world. He did not answer her question that night. He gave her the dry robe and took the chair by the cold hearth, and she took the bed because he would not be moved on it, and they lay and sat in the dark with the storm dying slowly beyond the glass. And somewhere near dawn, she heard his breathing finally even out into sleep, and only then did she let herself stop pretending and watch him. The long line of him folded into the chair, his head fallen against the wing of it, his face in sleep emptied of all its careful management and looking, for once, his actual age, which was young, which was far too young to have lived through everything the two of them had lived through. She fell asleep watching him. When she woke, he was gone, and the chair was empty, and a fresh pot of tea sat on the table going cold. And she understood that he had fled the room before she could wake and make him answer. The east wing was uninhabitable. The elf, Pym, she learned the name finally, having needed it, reported the damage in a small, frightened voice over breakfast. The blue rooms gone entirely, the corridor unsafe, the masons who would need weeks. Until then, Pym said, twisting the cloth, the mistress's things had been moved to the west wing, to the master's rooms. There was nowhere else in the sound part of the house that was aired. So the storm decided what neither of them could. They shared the rooms, not the bed. He kept to the chair the first night and the second, and on the third, she woke at 3 to find him gone from it, and went looking, and found him in the old still room with a cauldron of valerian going, and his head in his hands, not brewing, just sitting in the green-smelling dark. And she did not announce herself, only stood in the doorway and watched the bowed line of his back, and understood that the nearness was costing him something. It was not costing her, or was costing him differently, and she went back to the wide cold bed and lay alone in it, and did not sleep either. The midpoint of a marriage is not its wedding. It is the day the thing it has been avoiding can no longer be avoided. For them, it came on a grey afternoon in the second week, with the rain coming straight down and the lake gone to pewter beyond the streaming glass. And it came because of a door. She had been exploring the sound part of the house, restless, unable to work, the binding making it physically uncomfortable to be more than a certain distance from him for too long, so that she had taken to drifting through the rooms in a wide, slow orbit around wherever he was. And she came, in the west wing, to a door she did not remember, painted shut, or seeming so, the handle stiff with disuse. She opened it before she thought. The room beyond was small and north-facing, and held the cold, even light of the rain. It had been a nursery. It was still, in every particular that mattered, a nursery. The pale walls she did not remember choosing but must have. The cot in the corner with its bars and its empty mattress, the low shelf, the single soft grey rabbit sitting upright against the wall, with its ears fallen sideways, waiting, the way soft toys wait, with infinite stupid patience, for a child who is not coming. She had not known it was still here. She had assumed, in the long grey months, in all the avoidance, that he had had it cleared, that the room had been emptied and repurposed, the way you dress a wound by covering it. She had not let herself imagine that he had simply shut the door and left everything exactly where it had been the week they lost it, that he had walked past this room every day for 11 months on his way to his own, that he had kept it. She was still standing in the doorway when she heard him behind her. She did not turn. She heard him stop. She heard the precise quality of his stillness change, the listening stillness, the storm-coming stillness. and she heard him not breathe. And then she heard him breathe, once, raggedly. "You kept it," she said. "Hermione." Her name. Her first name. For the first time in 11 months, and it landed in the small, cold room like something dropped from a great height. "Come away from there. You kept it the way it was." She stepped inside instead, crossed to the cot, put her hand on the cold bar of it. "You didn't clear it. All this time, you let me think you'd... I thought you couldn't bear to have it in the house. I thought you'd had it gone within the week. I built an entire..." Her voice did something then that she could not control, climbing and breaking at once. "I built an entire grief out of the idea that you felt nothing, Draco. That you wanted it gone, that losing it was an inconvenience you'd had tidied away while I..." "Stop." But it was not the command of the hall that first night. It came out of him like a man pressing on a wound. "Please, stop." She turned. He was in the doorway, and he was holding to the frame of it with one hand, the knuckles standing white, and his face had gone past white into something grey. And she had never, in 3 years, in the war, in all of it, seen him look the way he looked now, stripped to the bone. The shutter not merely lowered, but gone, broken off its hinges, and what was behind it was so raw she nearly went to him out of simple animal mercy. "I came in here every night," he said. The rain came down. The grey rabbit waited against the wall. "Every night, Hermione, for a year. I'd brew the draught, and I'd sit in that chair." His eyes went to a low chair by the dark window she had not noticed, worn in the seat, drawn close to where the cot stood. "And I'd sit, and I couldn't sleep, and I couldn't go to you because you'd built, because I didn't know how to climb what you'd built. So I sat in here instead. With the..." His voice failed, and he forced it, and the forcing was terrible to watch. "With the things we'd bought, because it was the only room in the house where I was allowed to feel it. Everywhere else I had to be. I had to manage it. I had to be the one holding the estate together while you worked yourself blind and wouldn't let me near you. And in here, I could just..." His hand left the doorframe, pressed flat against his own chest, over the binding, over the heart. "I could just sit with it, with them, with the version of our lives that didn't happen." She could not speak. "And then, last spring," he went on lower, "you told me the house was large enough, and I heard... God, I heard it as 'Get out, I cannot bear you. You are part of what I lost, and I cannot look at you.' And so I left you the whole of the east wing, and I took the west, and I kept the one door shut between us, and I told myself it was what you wanted, that staying away was the last kind thing I had left to give you. And every night I came in here and sat in this chair, and I did not understand." His voice cracked clean through. "I did not understand that you thought I felt nothing. That you'd spent the year believing I'd had it cleared. That all the silence I meant as mercy, you'd read as a man who didn't care that his child was..." He stopped. He could not say the word. Neither of them in 11 months had ever once said the word. "Say it," she heard herself whisper. "Say it. We never said it. Not once. We lost it, and we never once said the word out loud. And that's... Draco, I think that's what killed us. Not the losing, the not saying." He looked at her across the small, cold room, across the cot and the waiting rabbit and the grey weight of the rain, and his eyes were wet, openly, the first time she had ever seen it. The cool, composed, impossible Malfoy's stillness drowned at last. "We lost our daughter," he said. The word, daughter, the word neither of them had ever permitted, went through the room like the breaking of a long-held charm, and Hermione made a sound she did not recognize as her own, and her legs gave, and she was on the floor by the cot with her hand still on its cold bar, and the grief she had carried alone for 11 months, in the armor of her work and her motion and her terrible competence, broke open all at once, all of it, the whole frozen lake of it cracking and going under, and she wept the way she had not let herself weep, not at the time, not after, not once, because at the time she had been too busy being strong, and after she had been too busy being angry, and there had never, in all of it, been a single safe moment in which to simply break. And then he was there. He crossed the room and he went down onto the floor beside her, the careful Malfoy who never knelt to anything. And he did not say anything because there was nothing to say, and he did not try to gather her composure for her because that was not what was needed. He simply put his arms around her, both arms, the way he had not held her in over a year, the way he had perhaps never quite held her, because the first time they had married too fast and frightened to hold each other properly. And he pulled her in against him on the cold floor of the nursery, and he held on, and she felt his own body shaking against hers, felt the wet of his face against her hair, and she understood that he was weeping too, silently, the way he did everything, and that the two of them were finally, 11 months and a marriage and a divorce too late, grieving the same loss in the same room at the same time. The binding at her wrist did not pulse. It did not burn. It did the thing it had done only once before, that night across the supper table. It went perfectly, profoundly still, the stillness of a thing that has found, after 400 years, exactly what it was built to find. Not love, not yet, not the easy thing the magic could not command, but the truth, the whole truth. Two people no longer lying to each other about where they were. They stayed on the floor a long time. The rain ran down the glass. The light failed by slow degrees, until the nursery went to shadow, and the grey rabbit was only a paler shape against the wall. And still he held her, and still she let herself be held, and neither of them reached for a wand to bring a light, because the dark, for once, was not the enemy. "I'm sorry," he said into her hair at last. Not the scripted thing, not the melodrama she might once have braced for, just the words, plain, worn smooth. For the silence, "I thought it was the kindest thing I had. I didn't know it was the cruelest. I'm sorry too." Her face was against his throat. She felt his pulse there, steady now, slowed. "I built the wall. I dared you to climb it, and then I hated you for not climbing it. I wanted you to fight your way through to me, and I never once told you the door was there." He drew back just enough to look at her. In the near dark, his face was only plains and shadow, but his eyes caught what little light there was, and they were looking at her the way they had looked in the storm, wholly, without defense, with the questions still living in them that she had asked him 3 nights ago, and he had run from twice. "Ask me again," he said, low. "What you asked, in the storm. Ask me again now, while I can't lie to you and don't want to." She knew the question he meant. Her heart was going hard against the cage of her ribs. "What if?" she said. You stopped not letting it move your feet. And this time he did not run. And this time he did not look away. And in the dark of the room where they had finally let themselves grieve the same grief, Draco Malfoy lifted one unsteady hand and laid it against the side of her face, his thumb finding the healed line at her temple where the storm had marked her. And he leaned in across the last of the distance that 11 months and 400 years had built between them. And he stopped. A breath from her mouth, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, the unsteady rhythm of his breathing, the heat of his palm against her jaw. Close enough that the smallest surrender would have closed it. And he stopped and held there, trembling, and she felt the war in him through the hand on her face. No, he said, barely a sound. Not like this. She drew back an inch. Draco. Not in this room. His thumb moved once against her cheek, helpless. Not because we've just broken ourselves open over. I won't have our first. He searched for it. I won't have it be a thing that happened because we were grieving, and the dark was kind, and the binding pushed us. If I kiss you, Hermione, I want it to be a thing I chose, standing up in the light, not a thing the floor and the storm and the contract arranged for us. His voice roughened. We married the first time because we were drowning, and each other was the nearest solid thing. I won't do it again. I won't reach for you because I'm reaching for the ground. She sat back on her heels on the cold nursery floor and looked at him in the failing light and felt something turn over in her chest that was not desire and was larger than desire. Felt, for the first time in the whole catastrophe of their marriage, that he had seen the precise shape of how they'd ruined it and had refused, at the cost of his own wanting, to ruin it the same way twice. That, she said unsteadily, is the most romantic thing you've ever said to me, and you're saying it to stop yourself from kissing me. You realize the absurdity. A sound came out of him that was almost a laugh, wrecked and wet and real. I have always been absurd. You married me regardless. I did. She let it sit. More fool me. He helped her up off the floor. They left the nursery together, and he did not shut the door behind them this time. Left it open, a hand's width, the way she had left her own door open through that first dead month. And the small detail of the open door said more than any speech could have. What followed was the strangest stretch of the whole strange year. The slow weeks in which they learned, deliberately and from the beginning, the thing they had skipped the first time. They had married before they had courted. So now, absurdly, under a contract designed to dissolve them, they courted. It was not grand. That was the wonder of it. It was the library on the rain-loud evenings, the two of them at opposite ends of the long table with the lamps lit low, and she would read a passage aloud because it was wrong, because the author had got the spell theory backwards, and he would argue the other side simply to keep her talking. And the argument would run an hour and settle nothing, and leave them both flushed and bright-eyed and reluctant to climb the stairs. It was the way he started leaving the still-room door open when he brewed, so the valerian smell came up through the house on purpose now, a deliberate offering. I am awake. I am here. The house is not empty. It was the morning she came down to find he had set her tea exactly the way she took it without being asked. and the small, frantic care she took not to let him see how much the small thing undid her, busying her hands with the sugar she did not want. They did not touch. He held to the boundary he had set on the nursery floor with a discipline that drove her, by turns, to tenderness and to a frustration so acute she had to leave the room. He took the chair at night still in the wide, dark master's quarters, and she took the bed, and the distance between the chair and the bed became, as the weeks went on, the most charged 8 feet in England, a width of dark. She lay awake, measuring, listening to him not sleep, knowing he was listening to her not sleep, the two of them held apart by his own stubborn insistence that when it happened, it would be chosen and not fallen into. The thread at her wrist had gone quiet for good. It no longer pulsed, no longer burned, no longer reminded. She understood that it had stopped policing them because there was no longer anything to police. They had stopped lying, and the contract, having no untruth left to object to, had simply settled into silence, a warm, sleeping weight beneath the skin. Some nights she pressed her thumb to it and felt nothing at all, and the nothing frightened her more than the burning had, because the burning had at least been a thing keeping them in the room together. Without it, there was only their own choosing. Only the year running honestly down toward the day it would let them go. And that was the splinter that worked its way in as autumn turned and the masons finished the east wing and the rain gave way to the first hard frosts. The day was coming. The contract had asked for 1 honest year. They were giving it 1, more honest than either of them had managed in the 3 before. And at the end of the honest year, the binding would do exactly what it had promised on the thorned parchment that first afternoon. The binding shall release what it has held, and the parties shall be free, free to divorce, free to walk away, cleanly, the thing they had gone to the ministry to do. She had stopped wanting it. She knew that with a completeness that left her hollow. Somewhere between the storm and the nursery, and the long lamplit arguments and the deliberate smell of valerian rising through the house, she had stopped wanting to be free of him, and started, God help her, started again, wanting only to be near him, and the cruelty of the timing was almost funny, that she should rediscover her marriage in the precise months designed to end it. But she could not tell whether he had. That was the doubt that crept in and would not leave. Because everything they had, the courtship, the tea, the open door, had begun under compulsion. They had been forced back into the same house, forced to the same table, forced into honesty by a magic that burned them when they lied. How could she trust any of it? How could she know whether the man who set her tea exactly right and left the still room open and held himself in a hard chair 8 feet from her every night was a man who chose her, or only a man being slowly worn into the shape of choosing her by the relentless proximity the contract imposed? When the binding released them, when the compulsion fell away, and the house was large enough again, and nothing forced him to her side, would he still come? Or would the whole tender autumn turn out to have been the magic's doing, a marriage performed so well that even the wards were fooled, and the two of them along with them? She did not ask him. She was too afraid of the answer, so she watched him instead, with a vigilance that was its own kind of grief, hunting his every gesture for evidence of choice rather than compulsion, and finding, maddeningly, that the two looked exactly alike from the outside. A man who brews where the smell will reach you because he loves you, and a man who brews where the smell will reach you because the contract has trained him to make precisely the same motions in the precisely the same dark. It came to a head on a frost-bright evening near the turn of the year in the library, with the lamps low and a hard, cold moon in the window and the lake gone to black glass beyond it. He had been reading. She had been pretending to. And he set down his book and looked at her across the long table and said, "You've gone somewhere these last weeks. You're here and you're not. Tell me where you've gone. We agreed we'd tell each other." And she should have lied and could not, because they did not do that anymore. "How will we know?" she said. "Know what?" "When the year ends." She turned the book closed under her hands. "When the binding lets go. We'll be free, Draco, truly free, the way we wanted to be that day at the ministry. Nothing holding us here. Nothing pulling your feet. And I..." Her voice was steady, which cost her everything. "I don't know how either of us will tell then whether this was real, whether any of this autumn was you choosing me, or just the contract pressing us together long enough that we mistook proximity for." She made herself stop. "We married drowning the first time. You said it yourself. And then a 400-year-old spell locked us in a house and forced us to stop lying, and forced us to the same table every night, and forced you, eventually, to want, or to seem to want. And I cannot tell, I genuinely cannot tell, where the contract ends and you begin. And when it lets go, when nothing's forcing you anymore, I'm terrified I'll watch you walk to the door and realize the whole thing was the magic the entire time, and I'll have let myself..." "Stop!" He was on his feet. "Hermione, stop! I'll have let myself fall back in love with my own husband under enchantment, like a fool, like a... Hermione!" He had come around the table. He stood over her, and his hand was at her chin, tilting her face up to his, and his eyes in the lamplight were fierce, and there was no shutter in them at all. Had not been for weeks now. Only the whole open, frightening truth of him. "You think I don't feel it pull?" he said, low and rough. "You think I can't tell either? I lie awake in that God-forsaken chair every night, 8 feet from you, and I have done for 2 months. And do you know why? Because the binding stopped pulling me toward you weeks ago. It went quiet. It let go of the compulsion the moment we stopped lying. You must have felt it. There's nothing pulling my feet anymore, Hermione. Nothing. The contract isn't keeping me in that chair. It isn't keeping me from your bed. It hasn't been the contract for a long time." She went very still. "Then what?" she whispered. "Me." His thumb moved against her jaw. "It's me. It's been me for weeks. Every night I choose that chair because I told you I wouldn't reach for you out of grief or the dark or the magic. And so I've been waiting for the day the binding lets go, waiting for the morning. There's nothing left forcing either of us, because that's the only morning a kiss could mean what I need it to mean. I have been counting the days to the end of this contract, Hermione, not so I can be free of you. God, the opposite. I've been counting them so that when I finally reach for you, you'll have to know, that nothing made me but me. The frost moon hung in the window. The lake lay black and still, and Hermione looked up at her husband, who had spent 2 months refusing her in a hard chair so that one day he could choose her in the clear, and felt the last of the doubt go out of her like a held breath finally released, and that was the moment the owl came. It struck the library window with the soft, heavy thud of a bird that has flown a long way through cold air, and the spell of the room shattered, and Draco's hand fell from her face, and the both of them turned toward the dark glass, where a great, tawny shape sat hunched against the frost, a ministry seal glinting on the parchment bound to its leg. She knew, before she opened it, that it would be for her. The ministry owls never came for Draco anymore. He had spent 3 years making himself useful to no one and beholden to no one, the surest defense a former Death Eater's son could build. This one had her name on it in the green ink of the senior offices. She unrolled it by the lamp. He waited, not asking, the courtesy of his that she had once read as indifference and now understood as restraint. "The International Confederation," she said slowly. "The Spell Law Reform Commission. They want—" She read it twice to be sure of it. "They want me to lead the Wizarding Rites Delegation. Geneva. A 3-year term. They've been trying to overhaul the marriage and binding statutes for a decade and getting nowhere, and they've—" A short, disbelieving breath. "They've decided I'm the one to do it, because of my work on the elf provisions, because of—" She stopped. Because of the binding, she did not say. Because someone in those offices had heard, the way they always heard, that Hermione Granger had walked into a ministry room to sign a divorce and walked out under a 400-year-old contract no modern law could touch, and had thought, who better to reform the statutes than a woman the old magic has its hooks in? They want an answer within the month. The silence that came down was a different weather than the one before. "Geneva," he said. "Geneva. For 3 years. For 3 years." She set the parchment down on the table between them, very precisely, as though it might detonate. "Draco, this is— do you understand what this is? This is the thing. This is the entire reason the binding statutes that trapped us, the marriage contracts that trap people every day, the whole rotten architecture of old magic that says 2 people can't choose their own lives. They're handing me the chance to break it, to rewrite it, so no one ever again signs away their freedom to a spell their great-great-grandfather cast. I have spent my whole career trying to get near a room like that, and they're offering me the head of the table. I understand exactly what it is." His voice had gone careful, flat, the old flatness, the one she had not heard in months, and she felt the cold of it the way you feel a door opens somewhere in a warm house. "It's everything you've worked for. It's Geneva. It's 3 years. And there it was. The splinter turned the other way, because of course, the contract had less than 2 months left to run, and of course, at the end of it, she would be free in every sense, free of the marriage and free of the manor, and free to take a thing she could not have taken as a married woman tied to an English estate, and a husband who could not leave the land his family's magic was rooted in. The contract that had locked them together was about to hand her the key to the one door she had wanted her whole life, and it sat on the far side of a continent from the man she had just, this very minute, stopped doubting. "You should take it," he said. She looked up sharply. He had stepped back from her, put the width of the table between them again, and his hands flat on the wood. And his face had reassembled itself into the cool, composed mask she had married. The armour she had spent 4 months watching come down piece by piece, now bolted back into place in the space of a single owl. It's the work you were born for. You'd be a fool to refuse it for... His jaw tightened. For an old house and a year you didn't choose, and a marriage that started by drowning. I won't be the thing that costs you Geneva, Hermione. I won't be one more contract that tells you what you can and cannot do with your life. God knows you've had enough of those. I won't be the next. Don't. The word came out hard. Don't you dare do that. Don't you dare go cold and noble on me and decide my life for me and call it a gift. That's the exact thing. That's the silence dressed up as mercy. That's the leaving you do and call kindness. That's what you did with the blue rooms and the nursery and the still room for an entire year. And we agreed. We agreed we don't do that anymore. This isn't the same. It is precisely the same. She was on her feet now, too. You've decided what's best for me, and you've decided to spare me the burden of choosing, and you've wrapped it in, I won't be one more contract. So it sounds like you're setting me free, when actually you're doing the thing you always do. You're walking out of the room before I can ask you to stay, because it is so much safer for you, isn't it, to be the one who let me go than the one who asked me not to leave. Because if I ask you not to leave, and you go anyway... His hand came down flat on the table, hard, and the lamp flames jumped. If I ask, Hermione, if I stand here and tell you the truth, that I would rather you stayed, that I have spent 2 months in a chair waiting for the day I could finally choose you, and now the day's coming, and so is the bloody International Confederation, and that the thought of you in Geneva for 3 years, while I rattle around this mausoleum, makes me... He stopped, his knuckles white against the dark wood, his breath gone ragged. If I ask, and you weigh it, and you choose Geneva, and you should choose Geneva, then I've made the most important work of your life into a thing you gave up for me, or a thing you resent me for, or a thing that sits between us for 3 years like a... No. No. I would rather lose you clean than have you stay and curdle. I have watched a marriage curdle. I will not do it twice. The truth of it, the raw, frightened, generous, awful truth of it, landed in her like a blow, because it was not noble cowardice after all, or not only that. It was a man who had learned the exact texture of how love rots when one person stays out of obligation, and who would sooner cut his own heart out than feel her go quiet across a breakfast table again. But she had learned something too in this terrible reversed year. She had learned that the leaving and the staying were not the only 2 doors, that there was a third thing, the thing neither of them had ever once tried in 3 years of marriage, which was to refuse to decide it alone. You're doing it again, she said, but softer now, the heat gone out of it, and something steadier underneath. You're solving it by yourself, in your own head, and handing me the finished answer. Lose you clean, as though those are the only Draco. There are not 2 options. There were never 2 options. That's the thing we never learned. We married drowning, and then we lived like a marriage was a thing that happened to us, a current we got caught in, and when it went wrong, we each decided alone and acted alone, and called it consideration. The blue rooms, the cleared nursery, I imagined. Geneva. You keep wanting to be the one who decides, because deciding alone means you never have to hear me say the thing you're afraid of. Well, ask me. You said it yourself just now. If I ask. So ask. Stop deciding for me and ask me the question, and let me be in the room for my own life. He stared at her. The lamps burned low. The owl, forgotten, shifted on the cold sill outside and was still. "All right," he said. His voice was barely there. "All right. I'm asking." He came around the table, slowly this time, no storm in it, no compulsion, the binding silent at both their wrists. And he stood before her, and he did not touch her, and she understood he was holding himself to the line he'd drawn in the nursery, even now, even here, that he would not reach for her until it was clean. "Stay, or go to Geneva and let me come with you, because there is nothing keeping me in England but a house I never wanted and a name I'd happily set down. Or go alone and let me wait, badly, for 3 years, and write you letters I'll be too proud to send and send anyway. I don't know which. I'm not deciding it. I'm asking you. What do you want, Hermione? Not what's best for me, not what spares me. What do you want?" The owl struck the glass again. Both of them turned. It was beating its wings now, agitated, and behind it, she saw it the same instant he did. The frost moon had gone, swallowed, and the lake had vanished, and the whole window was filling with a sick green light that did not belong to any moon. A light she knew, a light she had not seen since the war, climbing the dark glass from somewhere out on the grounds where nothing should have been moving at all. Draco's hand closed hard around her wrist. "Get away from the window," he said. And this time she did not argue, because his voice had gone to the place it went when the danger was real, and the green light was climbing, and somewhere beyond the cold glass of Malfoy Manor, something had come through the wards in the dark and was crossing the frozen lawn toward the house. The green light resolved as they watched from the dark of the library into a figure crossing the frost-white lawn with a lantern of bottled witch-fire held high, and the threat went out of the night as quickly as it had come, because the figure was small and stooped, and walking with the unhurried arrogance of a man who has never once in his life been told he could not go where he pleased. "That's not," Hermione started. "Gibbon." Draco's hand loosened on her wrist, though it did not let go. The fear in his voice had curdled into something colder and more weary. "Cassius Gibbon, my father's solicitor, was my father's solicitor. The witch-fire's an old family signal. It means he's come on contract business and wants the wards to let him through without the courtesies." His jaw set. He shouldn't be able to raise it. The authority died with my father, unless... The library doors opened without a knock. The man who came through them was very old and very upright, dressed in the high-collared black of a generation that had not changed its fashions since before the First War, and he carried himself into the room with the particular ease of someone who has spent a lifetime being admitted to places other people are turned away from. The witch-fire in his lantern threw a sick green wash across the bookshelves before he doused it with a snap of his fingers and let the lamplight take over. "Mr. Malfoy," a small bow, precisely calibrated. "Mrs. Malfoy," a smaller one, and something in the way he gave her the name, The slight relish of it, the testing of it, set her teeth on edge before he had said another word. Forgive the hour. I'd have come by daylight, but the matter is time-sensitive, and I find these things are best concluded before the parties have had occasion to overthink them. You have no standing here, Draco said, flatly. My father's instructions died with him. Whatever business you think you... Your father's personal instructions, yes. Gibbons set the lantern on the long table beside the forgotten Geneva parchment, and Hermione saw his old eyes flick to it, catalogue it, file it away. But the contract, Mr. Malfoy, the contract retains me. I am, and have been for 40 years, the appointed custodian of the Malfoy marriage instrument. It is my office to ensure its terms are observed and, where the family's interest requires, to ensure they are concluded efficiently. He folded his hands. Your year approaches its end, 6 weeks by my reckoning, and it has come to my attention that the two of you are at risk of, how shall I put this delicately, fumbling the dissolution. The room went very still. Explain that, Hermione said. Gladly. The old man's smile did not reach his eyes. The contract was designed, Mrs. Malfoy, by men of considerable foresight to prevent a Malfoy from marrying foolishly and abandoning the line. The second chance, as the sentimental call it. 1 honest year. But those same men were not romantics. They understood that a year of forced proximity might, on occasion, produce sentiment, reattachment, a reluctance to conclude what ought to be concluded. And so the instrument contains a provision, rarely invoked, which I am bound to offer you, now that the term nears its end. He drew a single sheet of the thorned, black-lettered parchment from inside his coat and laid it on the table with great care. A clean severance. Both parties release each other at once, tonight, with my authority as custodian and the contract's own sanction. No waiting out the final weeks. No further entanglement. You walk out of this marriage this very evening, both of you free, the estate's interest protected, the line preserved for a more suitable match in the fullness of time. His eyes settled on Draco, and there was something in them now that was almost paternal, almost kind, and was worse for it. I knew your grandfather, boy. I watched him spend 60 years chained to a woman the magic forced on him. I am offering you the thing he never had. The door. Take it. Hermione understood then what she was looking at. Not a threat. A temptation, dressed in the authority of the old family magic. The precise temptation that had brought them both to the ministry in the first place, handed back to them now in a form they could not easily refuse, by a man who served not them, but the cold abstract interest of a bloodline that had never once cared whether a single Malfoy was happy. And she understood, too, with a slow, cold dread, why the owl and the solicitor had come on the same night, why the Confederation's offer and this severance sat side by side on the table in the green-tinged lamplight. Because the world, having spent a year forcing them together, was now offering them every possible reason and every possible mechanism to be apart, cleanly, with full honor and no fault, and all they had to do was reach out and take it. She looked at Draco. His face had gone unreadable. The shutter she had spent 4 months watching dismantle was back, fully, and his eyes were on the black parchment, and his hand. She saw it. She would always remember it. His hand had drifted toward the table, toward the severance, the old reflex of a man for whom the clean exit had always been the safest thing. She felt the floor go out from under her the way it had gone in the storm. "Draco," she said, "it's what we came to do." His voice was very quiet. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the door Gibbon had laid on the table. "That day at the ministry, this is what we walked in to do. Both of us. We sat down to sign exactly this." His fingers touched the edge of the parchment. "Geneva, 3 years, the work you were born for, and no English contract holding you back from it. He's right that the timings. Stop looking at the parchment and look at me." He didn't. And so she did the thing she had never once done in 3 years of marriage and a year of its undoing. She did not wait for him to decide. She did not retreat into her own pride and let him choose the exit and then grieve it alone in a far wing of the house. She crossed the room, past the old solicitor, past the lantern, past the cursed black parchment with its kind, cold promise of freedom, and she took her husband's face in both her hands and turned it by main force away from the table and toward her own. "I am not signing that," she said. "And neither are you. And I'll tell you why, and the contract can listen, and your father's vulture of a solicitor can listen, and the whole 400 years of dead Malfoys can listen. Because I am done deciding my life in silence, and I am done watching you decide yours. I don't want the clean severance. I don't want the door. I spent a year wanting it, and I was wrong. I was a woman drowning who mistook the nearest shore for the only one, and I climbed out onto it and found I'd left the better part of my life in the water." Her thumbs moved against his jaw. His eyes had come up to hers, finally, and there was something breaking open in them. "Geneva, I'll take and you'll come, or I'll go and you'll wait, or we'll find a third thing, together, in a room, like people who are in their own lives. But I am not letting that man hand us a divorce as a mercy, because it isn't mercy. It's the same drowning dressed up in old magic, and I would rather wait out 6 more weeks and 100 more years than reach for the easy exit one more time and lose you to my own cowardice. Do you hear me? I'm not reaching for the shore. I'm reaching for you." The library was silent. Gibbon's old face had gone tight and grey, and Draco Malfoy, who had been about to touch the parchment, who had spent his whole life believing the clean exit was the only safe thing a man like him was permitted, put both his hands over both of hers where they held his face and shut his eyes. And when he opened them again, the shutter was not merely down, but gone, broken off forever, and what was behind it was the whole of him, undefended at last. "Get out," he said, not to her, to the old man at the table, without turning his head, his eyes never leaving hers. "Take your parchment and your lantern and your 40 years of service and get out of my house, Gibbon. There won't be a severance. Not tonight. Not in 6 weeks. Not ever." His voice was steady and low and absolutely certain, and she had never heard him sound like that. Not in 3 years. Not once. "Tell the contract, if it's listening. Tell the dead. I am not concluding this marriage efficiently. I am not preserving the line for a more suitable match. I married a woman who walked into a divorce and refused to drown twice, and I would sooner burn the estate to the foundation stone than sign her away to spare myself the risk of being loved." A breath. "You can show yourself out," The wards will let you. They're done taking your authority." The old solicitor stood a moment longer. Then he gathered his lantern and his black parchment, and he gave a final small bow, to Hermione this time, and only her, and there was something in it she could almost have mistaken for respect. And he went, and the library doors closed behind him, and the green witchfire flared briefly on the lawn beyond the window, and dwindled and was gone, and the frost moon came back out over the black lake. And then it was only the two of them, in the low gold lamplight, her hands still on his face, and his hands still over hers, 6 weeks short of the freedom they had wanted, and no longer wanted, with the Geneva parchment lying forgotten on the table, and the whole undecided future of their lives still in the room with them, unsolved, unsigned, shared. "You said," she whispered, "you'd wait until it was clean, until nothing forced us, until you could choose." "I did say that." His thumb moved against the back of her hand. "The contract still has 6 weeks to run, Draco." "I know. It hasn't let go yet. By your own rule, you should wait." "I know that too." And his hands tightened over hers, and he leaned in, slow, no storm and no grief, and no compulsion in it at all. Only choice. Only a man crossing the last of a distance because he had decided to and for no other reason in the world. "I find," he murmured, a breath from her mouth, "that I have stopped caring what the contract permits." He kissed her. It was nothing like the first time, the wedding night fumbling of two people grabbing at each other in the dark to keep from going under. It was not the storm-charged near thing in the corridor where the danger had done half the wanting for them. It was slow and deliberate and entirely chosen. His mouth coming to hers with a care that shook, his hands sliding from her hands to her face to the back of her neck, drawing her in by degrees as though even now, even here, he could not quite believe the distance was his to close. She made a sound against his lips that she had been holding for a year and longer, and her own hands fisted in the front of his shirt the way they had on the floor of the corridor. But this time she did not pull him in to save herself. She pulled him in because she wanted him, plainly, in the clear light of having chosen it, and that was the whole difference. That was everything. The lamps burned low and gold. The frost moon hung in the window over the black glass of the lake, and at her wrist, beneath the skin, the binding that had gone silent for weeks, gave one slow, warm pulse. Not the curious listening flicker of the supper table, not the burn of the first night's quarrel, but something deeper, a single beat like a heart turning over, the response of an ancient magic recognizing, at the last, the precise thing it had been built 4 centuries ago to find, and had so rarely found that it had nearly forgotten the shape of it. She felt it. He felt it. She knew, because he broke the kiss to look down at his own wrist, and then at hers, his breath unsteady, his forehead coming to rest against hers in the lamplight. "It felt that," he said. "It felt that." They stood a moment longer, foreheads together, breathing the same air, and then the warmth at her wrist began to change, to gather, to gleam, to rise. The fine threads of light lifted from beneath her skin the way they had risen from the parchment in the ministry room a year ago, gold gone to white, fine as spider silk, except that this time they did not braid into a binding. This time they unwound. She watched the luminous filament that had connected her wrist to his across a year of forced proximity loosen and lengthen and let go. Not severed, not cut, nothing so violent as the clean severance the old solicitor had laid on the table, but released, the magic uncoiling itself from around their two pulses with the gentleness of a thing setting down a weight it had carried a long way. "It's letting go," she said. Her voice caught. "Draco, the year isn't up. There are 6 weeks left. It can't. It can." His arms had come around her, and he was watching the light unwind between them with an expression she had never seen on his face, something close to awe. "Don't you see? It was never counting the days. My grandmother told me, it doesn't read what you feel, it reads what you do with it. It asked for one honest year. It never asked for a calendar. It asked us to stop lying about where we stood and to choose each other in the clear with nothing forcing our hands." His arms tightened. "We just did. In front of Gibbon, in front of the dead, with every reason and every door to walk away, and we didn't. That's the year, Hermione. That's the whole of it. The honest year wasn't 12 months. It was that. It was now." The threads of light hung in the air between them a moment, gleaming, suspended. And then they did not fall, and they did not fade, but rose, the both of them watching, up past the low gold lamps and the tall dark spines of the library books, up into the high-shadowed vault of the ceiling, where they spread and thinned and became, for one held breath, a faint constellation of warmth across the old stone. The marriage contract of the House of Malfoy, 400 years of binding, dispersing not into divorce, but into simple released light. A question finally answered. A cage that turned out to have been, all along, only a question. Is this true? And the truth had been given, freely, with the door wide open, and so the magic had no more need to hold. The light faded. The library was only a library again, warm and gold and quiet, the frost moon in the window, the lake black and still beyond. Hermione looked down at her wrist. There was nothing there. No mark, no warmth, no pull, no listening pressure beneath the skin. The binding was gone, wholly gone, in a way the burning and pulsing year had never let it be. And she understood with a clarity that filled her eyes that she was free, truly free, the thing she had walked into the ministry to win a year ago. Free to take Geneva, free to walk out of the manor and never come back. Free of the contract, free of the family, free of him. And she was still standing in the circle of his arms and had no wish on earth to leave them. "It's gone," she whispered. She turned her wrist over, showed him the bare, unmarked skin of it. "Draco, it's gone. There's nothing holding us. Nothing pulling your feet. Nothing forcing either of us to stay in this room one more second." She lifted her eyes to his, and her voice shook on the asking, because this was the question. This had always been the question, the one buried under the storm and the nursery and the long lamplit autumn and the old solicitor's cold mercy. So, here we are, free, both of us. The clean exit you wanted, the way you wanted it. Nothing chosen for us, nothing made us. This is the morning you said you were waiting for, the one where there's nothing left forcing you. He looked at her for a long moment in the gold light. And then Draco Malfoy, who had spent a lifetime believing the clean exit was the only safe thing a man like him was permitted, who had stood in corridors for a year not daring to knock, who had nearly reached for the severance an hour ago out of the oldest reflex he owned, took her bare, unmarked wrist in his hand very gently and lifted it and pressed his mouth to the place where the binding had been, where there was nothing now but her own pulse going hard beneath the skin. "Then I choose you," he said against her wrist, "with nothing making me, with the door wide open and Geneva on the table and 400 years of dead Malfoys telling me to take the clean way out. I choose you, Hermione. Not because I'm drowning, not because the magic pulls, not because the house is empty without you, though God knows it is." He raised his head, and his eyes were wet, and he did not bother to hide it. Not any more, not ever again. "Because I sat in a chair 8 feet from you for 2 months, learning the difference between wanting you and reaching for the ground, and there is no difference left. You are the ground. You're the thing I'd reach for in the dark on purpose. Stay, or go to Geneva and let me come, or send me letters for 3 years and I'll learn to send mine back. I don't care which. I'll take any of them. I'll take all of them. I only want it chosen. I only want you to know that when I reach for you now, nothing makes me but me." She was crying and laughing, and her hands had come up to his face again, and the frost moon poured its cold, clean light across the both of them. "Geneva," she said, "and you come with me. The estate can manage itself or fall down. I don't care. I'm not leaving the better part of my life in the water twice. A breath. And we say the word. From now on, we say the hard things out loud the day they happen, not 11 months later in a room we've been avoiding. We don't do the silence again. We don't do the mercy that's really just leaving. We decide things together, in the room, like people in their own lives. Promise me. I promise. No hesitation. I'll be terrible at it. I've a lifetime of practice at the other thing. So have I. We'll be terrible at it together. There's a sentence to put on a wedding ring. And that, the dry, impossible wit of him, surfacing now of all moments, the same man she had married drowning and was choosing again in the clear, undid her entirely, and she pulled him down and kissed him, and this time there was nothing tentative in it at all, no shaking, no holding back, no contract listening, and no distance left to cross. The lamps burned low. The library held them in its warm gold quiet. Somewhere far off in the mended house, a shutter knocked once against stone and went still, and the valerian smell was not brewing tonight, because for the first time in a year there would be no draught needed, no chair by the cold hearth, no 8 feet of charged dark between a bed and a man who would not cross it. Later, much later, when the moon had crossed the window and the lamps had burned down to embers, she would remember the Geneva parchment lying forgotten on the long table, and they would read it again by morning light and laugh at how small it suddenly seemed beside everything. And they would go, the two of them, to a city of clean glass and high cold mountains, where she would spend 3 years dismantling, statute by statute, the precise architecture of old magic that had once locked them in a house and forced them to learn what they should have learned for themselves, so that no one ever again would have to be compelled into the truth, would have to be burned for lying about their own heart, would have to wait 400 years and a storm and a kept nursery to say the word daughter out loud and grieve it in the right arms. But that was the morning, and the months, and the years. Tonight, there was only the library and the dying gold light, and a man and a woman who had walked into a divorce and walked out of it, married, truly married for the first time by their own choosing and nothing else, standing in the warm dark of a house that had finally let them go, and finding that, set free, with every door open and the whole wide world to walk into, they wanted only to stay exactly where they were, in each other's arms, having chosen. The binding was gone. What was left was theirs.
So that's the story I want to tell you why I wrote it. Most love stories are about two people falling in love. This one is different. These two already fell in love. They already married. They already gave up. The story starts at the end. That scared me a little, but it also felt true because real love is not just the beginning. The hard part comes later. The hard part is staying. The hard part is talking when you want to be silent. That was the story, and that was the whole problem. Not hate, silence. There is one moment I keep thinking about. They lost a child, and for a whole year neither of them said the word out loud, not once. They each thought the other one did not care, but they were both just hurting alone, in different rooms. When they finally say it, when he says the word daughter, everything breaks open, and then it begins to heal. That is the part that feels human to me. We do this too. We stay quiet to protect ourselves, and the quiet hurts more than the truth ever would. So, if you take one thing from this story, take this. Say the hard thing. Say it today, not 11 months. Today. Thank you for listening. I hope it stayed with you.